Welcome, everyone. I'm Steve Rogenstein, Honeybee Watch's project director and your host today. I'm joined by Arrigo Moro, our science director, who will lead our Q&A session at the end of the day. Today, we'll hear from three experts who not only talk the talk, but walk the walk too. Each has been directly involved in visionary ideas that, through fortitude and action, have become, or in the process of becoming, legally viable policy changes for the betterment of bees and nature. We'll hear their stories, and then at the top of the hour, I'll lead a panel discussion, and that'll be followed by a Q&A with the audience that Arrigo will moderate. To start, I'll briefly introduce Honeybee Watch to those of you who are unfamiliar with us. We've been around for more than 5 years. We're an international coalition tasked with better understanding how free-living honeybees survive via natural selection with little or no human intervention. And by free living, we mean bees that choose where they want to live, whether that be in tree cavities, natural tree cavities, or log hives, holes in the ground, building walls, chimneys, abandoned beehives. Wherever they choose, that's where they want to be. So Honeybee Watch's aim is to find nature-based solutions to lower mortality rates of managed colonies, increase beekeeping sustainability, and ultimately protect these threatened wild populations around the world. In a nutshell, this Symposia series is also part of our efforts to create and kind of consolidate and build community around this global coalition that's centered around free-living honeybees. We've organized the Symposia series for the last 3 years, and its attempt is to introduce experts to one another to facilitate the exchange of knowledge and data and best practices. It's to introduce you as the audience to their work and to connect you to one another. And of course, in a Symposia series, we want to dive into challenging topics and really explore what the possibilities are, maybe come to some solutions. And then that brings us to today's program, the last symposium of the year, which is titled Policy Issues, Banning Imports, Fighting Pesticides and GMOs, and Rights of Nature. So we're excited to welcome our three guests and provide this platform for them to share policy-related stories, which hopefully will leave you feeling empowered and inspired, and maybe even for you to take steps towards legislative change where you're located to benefit bees and nature. Our first guest actually came to us via a Google search, actually a couple of years ago. For a different bee-related project that I was working on, I was searching for a speaker on the rights of nature, a topic that's fascinated me for years, that a river in South America had earned legal protections, and then a couple of years later, a mountain too, and how incredible that these environmentalists were fighting for and winning legal battles on behalf of the voiceless, rivers, mountains, and non-humans too, such as bees. So that Google search came up with Margil from CEDAR, which is the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. If you could drop that link in the chat box. And they are literal pioneers in this field of rights of nature. Per their website, they have catalyzed change in the legal status of nature from being property without even the most basic rights to exist to nature being recognized as a living entity with legal rights. So it's kind of mind blown that we've finally gotten to this place in society. So it's a personal feat to have Mari here with us today to share snippets of Cedar's story.
So thank you, Steve. It is really lovely to join you. I am based on the West Coast, USA, in Washington State. As Steve said, I work with a nonprofit organization based in the US, the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. We work in the USA, but we also do work around the globe. And our focus is on the rights of nature. And so I have been asked this to set the stage for this 2 hours on basically what is the rights of nature, what I would call the basics of the rights of nature. So that's what I'm going to focus on so that we all can have sort of a shared understanding of what do we mean when we talk about rights of nature. Um, and so I'm going to begin with the basic question, what is the rights of nature? So the rights of nature, this the very basic idea here is the recognition by lawmaking, by a city council, by a national parliament, or by a court that's making a decision or a ruling. It's recognizing that nature has legally enforceable rights. So it's establishing in law that nature has certain enforceable rights. And that could be nature as a whole has those rights, such as in Ecuador's constitution, which we assisted in drafting. So all of nature within this country of Ecuador possesses constitutional enforceable rights. Or it could be that a particular species or a particular ecosystem has their rights recognized. So, for instance, the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, a tribal nation in the United States, established that the species of wild rice that grows within their region has legally enforceable rights within their tribal indigenous governance. Or particular ecosystems have had their rights recognized. In Ecuador, there have been multiple rivers that have had their rights recognized as a river ecosystem. So the rights of nature is that basic idea that nature itself, for the first time, is having its legal rights recognized, either through lawmaking or through court rulings. And this is so important. It represents a very fundamental shift in how nature is treated under laws around the world. And legal rights are the highest form of legal protection that we have in written law. And that means that when we're recognizing that nature has rights, that means we're giving it the highest level of protection that exists within human written law. And this has led to nature having a number of different rights. And so there have been laws and court rulings that have recognized the most basic right, as Steve mentioned, the most basic right of all, the right to exist, which is very new within legal systems. The right of nature to flourish, to evolve, to regenerate, to reproduce, for species, to restoration, if its rights are violated, to correct that harm. The right of a species to habitat, the right of nature to perform its natural functions, the right of species to migrate. There have been court rulings and laws that recognize the right of rivers to flow, the right of nature to a healthy climate, the right to clean water, for instance, for water bodies. So these are some of the rights that have been recognized within rights of nature laws and court rulings. So it's important in thinking about the rights of nature to understand, well, what does current non-rights of nature laws, what do current environmental laws do? What's the problem? Why are we moving in this direction of recognizing that nature possesses rights? So when we think about conventional, everyday environmental laws, which often are called things like a Clean Air Act or a Clean Water Act, and there are these kinds of laws all over the world. These laws treat nature as a commodity or as property, so owned by humans, basically as a thing, nature as a thing, without even that basic right to exist. And because it's treated as a thing, just this thing sort of, the words natural resource mean that nature is just considered to be just sort of sitting there, waiting for humans to use it. That's how the law treats nature. And so environmental laws, which we tend to think are about protecting nature, are largely about regulating how humans use nature, use that thing. So environmental laws legalize, or what you might call license or permit. Governments issue licenses or permits to different entities to be able to do something with nature. And that doing something with nature means authorizing the use and exploitation of nature to pollute the atmosphere, to fill a wetland or a bog, meaning to cause it to disappear, to hydrofrack through aquifers and cause all sorts of pollution to the atmosphere and to water. Environmental laws are about legalizing the use of nature, and therefore we know that brings known harms. So environmental laws, we came to understand in our work, are largely about legalizing and authorizing environmental harm. And they're able to do that because nature is treated as this thing without rights, without the ability to protect itself. And the consequence of that, no surprise, I'm sure, to everybody who is watching here, is that by treating nature as a thing, we've caused deep harm to the natural world. We're seeing ecosystem collapse with coral reefs dying and bleaching all over the globe. We see species extinction accelerating at more than 1,000 times background extinction rates, natural rates, with 1 million species already facing extinction due to human activity. Climate change, of course, this isn't even the most updated, but the past decade's the warmest in human record. So we're causing all sorts of consequences. And of course, climate change leads to ecosystem collapse and species extinction. So it's all connected. And this is the consequence of thousands of environmental laws all around the world. But those laws treat nature as this thing or as property that's sitting around waiting for humans to use it. It's about the use and exploitation of nature, which leads us to an understanding in our organization that we need a really fundamental shift in our human relationship with the natural world. Something really fundamental needs to change if we're going to achieve anything close to true sustainability, or what we often say is harmony with nature. And that means sort of changing our minds, of course, but also shifting our laws to recognize that we human beings are part of nature and dependent on nature. So even for the most selfish of reasons, changing how we relate to and protect nature is essential for our own survival. And that nature is no longer considered by law as sitting around existing and waiting for humans to use it, but that nature is understood as having intrinsic value unto itself. And that our environmental laws, it's not enough for us to think this, right? We actually have to establish it in our law and policy so that our environmental laws reflect this shift in relationship to nature, which is focused foremost on protecting nature rather than regulating its use or exploitation. And finally, just that basic idea that nature within law, within policy, is recognized as a living being with legal rights. And this has really started to be demonstrated beginning in 2006 when the first rights of nature law was developed. And it was written by my co-founder of my organization, Thomas Lindsay. He wrote the very first rights of nature law in the world. And that was adopted by a local community in the state of Pennsylvania in the United States. It was the first law anywhere to recognize that nature even possesses that basic right to exist. And from 2006, and almost 20 years later now, we now have national laws in Ecuador. It's within the Constitution. Ecuador is the only country that has recognized constitutional rights of nature, what they call Pachamama. Bolivia has followed, Uganda, New Zealand, Panama, Spain, all have established national laws that recognize rights of nature on the whole or particular ecosystems or species. We also see subnational rights of nature laws and policies. So provincial, state, local policies now established in Brazil and Peru and Mexico and Canada, the United States. Of course, we have more than 36 rights of nature laws in the US, Northern Ireland, England, Ireland itself, Australia. So we're seeing a deep spread of these within law and policy, that the rights of nature is now being protected with certain rights. And as I mentioned, First Nations, tribal nations have now established rights of nature within their indigenous governance, including the White Earth, which recognized the rights of wild rice. We have the Yurok tribe in Northern California, Menominee tribe in the state of Wisconsin, Rappahannock tribe. There have been First Nations in Canada as well. And it's not just lawmaking in which the rights of nature are being recognized, but also within court rulings. So in Colombia, for instance, where they don't have a rights of nature law, national law, but they have had the Constitutional Court, their Supreme Court, and other courts recognize the rights of rivers and other ecosystems because essentially what the courts have said is that our environmental laws aren't doing the job of protecting the environment, and no wonder they weren't established to do that. And rather, we need to recognize the rights of these ecosystems in order to properly protect them. So there have been court rulings at national level, at lower levels, in Colombia, India, Bangladesh. Bangladesh recognized the rights of all rivers within their courts. Peru, Mexico, and this is continuing to grow, both the lawmaking and court rulings, recognizing that nature possesses certain rights. And of course, we're here to talk about bees. And so just briefly, let's talk about the rights of bees. And so just this year, Peru, an ordinance was adopted, local ordinance by a municipality was adopted to recognize the rights of stingless bees. And that's the first time that we've seen that happen. And that's really, really exciting, a local ordinance to do that in a protected area. In Mexico, and I know Eric will speak about this, so I won't go into any detail, but a court ruled that bees should be recognized as subjects of rights. So they should have rights of nature. And certain pesticides can't be used because they're interfering with the ability of bees to be healthy and have strong, resilient populations. In the United States, we've worked on rights of pollinators, local laws that are being considered in places like Colorado. And so when we think of rights of bees, if we're to put it into a local law, into a national law, a state law, thinking about what these rights might look like. And so the basic right to exist, the right to flourish, the right to regenerate, the right of bees to reproduce, the right of them to naturally evolve as a species, the right to restoration if harmed, and importantly, things like the right to habitat. Steve spoke about free colonies. Well, in order to have free colonies, we need to be able to have the habitat necessary for those populations to be able to exist there, to live there, and to survive and to thrive. As well as really important rights to be free from things like insecticides, pesticides, genetic engineering, other threats. So many of the rights of nature laws that we've worked on, for instance, not only recognize the certain rights, like to exist and flourish and thrive, but also the right to be free from those kinds of human activities that directly interfere with the ability of a species or an ecosystem to be healthy and robust and resilient. And that can be things like industrial hog farming, fracking, pollution, other things. So in order to protect and guarantee those rights, to uphold those rights, we have to eliminate the thing that's directly interfering with them. So many rights of nature laws put in specific prohibitions on practices, activities, industrial kinds of corporate behavior that will directly interfere with those rights to ensure and protect those rights. So when we think about rights of bees, and this is work that we do as an organization, we help communities, we help indigenous organizations, we help tribal and First Nations, we help governments to think about what would it look like to establish the rights of nature and law, help them do the legal research, help them do the drafting. And the question really is, okay, if we're focusing on an ecosystem, if we're focusing on a species, what rights does that species, what rights does that ecosystem need to be healthy, to be thriving, to be resilient in the face of the many environmental threats that we face today? And that's really the heart of any rights of nature laws. What are those rights that species need, that ecosystems need to be the healthy, thriving populations that we know that they need to be? And then we build up from there to include things like the ability of those rights to be enforced. And so this is really quite critical. As you might be familiar with conventional environmental laws, they can be often very, very difficult for you and me or an NGO to be able to enforce those rights. What we build into rights of nature laws are that we human beings or we environmental organization can step into the shoes of a river, for instance, or a bee population, for instance, to serve as their voice. They are what we call the real party in interest. And what that means is that they're the holder of the rights. The bees are the holder of the rights. They need to be able to enforce those rights. And we humans can act on their behalf to enforce their rights in court, for instance, if that's necessary. So having the ability to enforce these, so not just legal rights, but the ability to enforce those rights are absolutely critical, because we don't want them just to be words on paper. We want them to be able to be exercised so that the species or the ecosystem is able to fulfill what those rights are promising. And so the last thing I will simply say is this, is that this is work that we do. As I mentioned, we worked on the first rights of nature laws in the US and Ecuador, elsewhere. We partner with all sorts of organizations and communities and levels of government around the world to advance, to develop these laws, to implement these laws, to enforce these laws, which is absolutely critical. And I invite you to learn more about us, learn more about this work. I have all of our contact information, website, social media, etc. here. And I just want to say thank you very much to Steve and the organization for inviting us. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mari. I love hearing this story that we're finally at a point where we're recognizing that nature should not be exploited like it is, and that there are humans that are committed to this. And you are one of them, and your organization is a pioneer in this field. And on behalf of all the voiceless non-humans and everyone else, thank you for your work because it's
Thank you.
so critical, so important. And in particular, I appreciate you bringing the bees into your introduction because it's a perfect segue to our next guest.